Live streaming is on.
Hey guys, welcome to Social Studies today. We're going to look at the Civil War a little bit today. Last class we looked at kind of free states versus slave states and how whenever a new state came into our country there had to be, so if it was a free state there had to be a slave state, so we tried to make sure that everyone was equally represented. But we're going to get a little further into the actual Civil War today. So it says the Constitution, something is missing. It says the Constitution set up the rules for government. The first 10 constitutional amendments, called the Bill of Rights, listed the rights a citizen should expect. And that would be like freedom of speech, right to bear arms, rights to protest, the things we went over, we did the Bill of Rights. But when these documents were written, over 1/3 of the population of the United States was not considered citizens. These were the slaves and free blacks living in the United States. They were born in the U.S., worked for the U.S., and died in the U.S., but were not protected by the founding documents or by state laws. It took a war between the states to bring change to the Constitution that would end slavery and set the path for greater equality. Okay, so it says states taking sides. We don't often hear much about new states being added to the United States anymore, but in the early 1800s, several new states were added to the Union. One of the hot topics of the day was these new states would allow slavery like the southern states or ban it like most other states. Over time, these two regions had developed in different ways, which led to the conflict. Check out the map to see which states would allow slavery and which didn't. And we kind of covered this the other day. I had you kind of look at slave states and free states. For the most part, it was most of the states in the north. And if you look at this map, you can see like Indiana, Illinois, Ohio, Pennsylvania, New York, Vermont, New Hampshire, Mass, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New Jersey, Delaware, and actually Maryland would be southern state. So Maryland, Virginia, Kentucky, Tennessee, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina. So those are the slave states, which are in this map, are the yellow, and the green are what they called as the free states. So eventually, the situation basically came to a head, and what happened was what in our country we consider a civil war, where the North and the South went to war over the issue of slavery. And if you look at here, it says Civil War. The debate over slavery and the rights was the main factor leading the bloodiest war in our country's history. The slave states in the South decided they would be better off as a separate nation, so they seceded from the United States. Succession means separation or breaking away. But President Abraham Lincoln did not want the nation to be divided. War began between the southern states, which called themselves the Confederate States of America, and the northern states were still known as the United States of America. President Lincoln led the United States during the war. The Confederate States set up its own government, military. This war between the states, now called the Civil War, deeply and bitterly divided Americans on both sides. So the North was also called the Union, and the South was called the Confederacy. So if it comes up on the test, those things mean the same thing. The North and the Union are the same, and the Confederate and the South. You know, also the South, they set up their own capital, they had their own army, they had their own money. So they really went all out to try to form their own country. So emancipation. In the middle of the war in 1863, President Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, declaring that all slaves in the South were free. Emancipation means freedom. Although it was a huge important step, it didn't have the immediate effect, did not help slaves in the South because the Confederate States of America had its own government and did not feel bound by the proclamation by the United States president. It also did not help slaves in states that had not succeeded. Even so, the Emancipation Proclamation was a big deal. Although it failed to free any actual slaves, it did send a strong message. When the war was over, slavery in the U.S. would end. The U.S. government took this as a sign to move forward with additional laws that changed citizens' rights in America. Okay. So this says Civil War and Reconstruction, and a lot of times you'll hear those two terms. And what Reconstruction means is that's after the Civil War ended. It's how do we put our country back together? It's like reconstructing something because it was broken because of Civil War, and how do we now bring our country back together? So it says in January 1865, 3 months before the war ended, Congress passed the 13th Amendment of the Constitution outlawing slavery in the United States. So the war ended, in April of 1865, so about 4 months later. After that, all states were once again part of the United States of America. In December 1865, slavery was finally abolished in the entire United States when the last state ratified the 13th Amendment. Okay, so President Abraham Lincoln is said to save or preserve our union by winning the war to keep all states together. But the war left much of the South destroyed and disorganized, and the southern states need to be made part of the United States again. The new president, Andrew Johnson, believed the southern states could be let back in the U.S. with no consequences. But many in Congress wanted to make sure the southern politicians were punished for succeeding. Also, they did not want the southern politicians to interfere with the new freedom of African Americans. This period of rebuilding after the Civil War is known as Reconstruction. Many in the South resisted the changes, and the federal government had to send troops to enforce the new civil rights laws. So this is changing the Constitution. The 13th Amendment did not end the former slaves' trouble. Many southern states quickly passed laws to restrict what little freedom the former slaves had. Something more was needed to expand and protect the rights of the former slaves. As part of the Reconstruction effort, Congress added 2 more amendments to the Constitution. In 1868, the 14th Amendment guaranteed citizens to all people born in the U.S. This amendment also gave all citizens the right to due process, equal protection under the law. In 1870, the 15th Amendment gave all men the right to vote regardless of their race, whether they had been slaves before the war. So I just want to stop there for a second. So you guys, we talked about federalism a little bit. That's the concept of there's federal laws and state laws. And states are still able to make laws. So even though we had the 13th Amendment ending slavery, certain states could still make laws that restricted people's rights. And I'm trying to think of, well, some of you guys are a little bit older, remember, states were able to, in the 80s, set the age that you could drink. Some states allowed you to drink at 18, some allowed you to drink at 19, some allowed you to drink at like 21. And now every state is 21. Also, now certain states have different laws about carrying guns. So basically, states are still able to make their own laws. And sometimes, obviously, certain states have more restrictive gun laws than other states. But, states do still, under our, federalism, there's the federal government, the state government. So states still can make laws that make it hard for people to do certain things. Okay. So due process. Due process means that people have the right to be treated fairly by the government. There are 2 kinds of due process. One has to do with what law actually says. Laws must be fair and reasonable. The government cannot pass laws that unfairly limit people's life, liberty, or property. The other type of due process has to do with how laws are enforced. Government officials must follow certain rules and procedures when they enforce laws. They cannot take away or limit someone's life, liberty, or property without following these rules. Okay, equal protection. So that was the 14th Amendment. Equal protection in the 14th Amendment means the government must treat people equally. Unreasonable discrimination by the government is not allowed. If a law does not treat one group of people differently, the government must prove there's a good reason for it. Courts will decide if the reason is good enough to let the law stand. Equal protection and due process were rights that African Americans lacked due to their race or former state of slavery. By granting these rights, as well as the right to vote, the Constitution expands citizenship to a whole new group of Americans. Okay, so that would be the 14th Amendment is the equal protection. Okay, so the last few things here are just some things you can work on. So it says, what if at the end of the Civil War, Southern states had become part of the United States again? Which of these steps would you recommend if you were in charge of creating the country? So this basically asks you, it gives you the two perspectives. So column one, it would be punish the South, those states don't try to secede again. Or column two, would you let the Southern states come back in the Union without being punished? So it just gives you a perspective of kind of what Abraham Lincoln, had to do to repair our country. Like it said in that article, some people want to punish the Southern states, some people didn't to move forward. So it's really kind of your, obviously, your personal perspective on whether you think, when the South wanted to form their own country, they went against the rest of our country, if there should be punishment or not. So it just asks you to kind of go down these columns and decide what you would do. Here are just some vocabulary words that were in the article. So due process, succession, emancipation proclamation, equal protection, reconstruction. You can just fill in the blanks there. And these are just quotes that you would match with different groups of people. And here are just some. So this is the North. This is the Confederate. You're just trying to match the term with either was the North or the South. And here it just talks about the different amendments. So everything you need is in that reading article. You can certainly go back and try to fill in the rest of that when you get a chance. All right, you guys, that's it for today. Have a wonderful weekend, and we'll see you all next week.